Hello, everyone, and welcome to our podcast. I'm Dani, and today Crate.com talks with Myron Bernard, the Deputy Director at Tacoma Rescue Mission. If you haven't heard of it yet, they work in Pierce County to give people who live in homelessness an access to a pathway out of poverty. Before we begin, remember, if you're new here to this podcast, press subscribe on YouTube or in your podcast app. Hi, Myron, and welcome.
Hi, thank you for having me, Dani.
It's a pleasure, truly. Thank you so much for being here and talking to us. Let's begin by knowing more about history, right? How did it all begin? What inspired the creation of the Tacoma Rescue Mission?
Yeah, so the Tacoma Rescue Mission is in the city of Tacoma. It began in 1912. So those familiar with United States history will know that there was this period of time called the Great Depression. And that coincided in the Pacific Northwest region of the United States that we're in. It's a large lumber region. There were a lot of people that built a railroad out to the west coast of the United States. And when the Depression era hit, there were a lot of people without jobs. The lumber industry began to dry up. A lot of people that came this way looking for opportunity, and that opportunity wasn't there. And so it began primarily as a place to feed people who were hungry and who were on the streets. And over the past 111 years, those services have evolved. And so we are a faith-based organization who believes that our faith would call us to take care of people who are pushed into the margins, and that we see a Jesus who loves those who are called the least and the last. And that's where we go as well. We love to go to places where people can be found who need assistance, who can receive help. So
that's wonderful, and thank you so much for sharing this history bit with us. I myself didn't know that, and that makes me think, what is the situation that you face now exactly? Because you brought up some causes for the issue, like some background on this issue. But right now, what are the root causes that you're trying to face and change right now?
Sure. No, that's great. Well, and for listeners in the United States, depending on their region, they know that homelessness is a growing crisis in the United States. And I think that that's something that not every country can necessarily recognize or maybe relate to, the severity of the crisis that we face in the United States with this. When I was in Switzerland several years ago, there was one person in the entire city of Geneva that, as I was touring the entire area, I noticed one person that looked like they were living on the streets. The person who was giving me a tour, they viewed it as this massive national thing that if there's a bed in Switzerland, then no one should be sleeping on the streets. And in the United States, we have a growing problem. And you ask about the causes, there's lots of different causes. And, one of the challenges specifically when we're talking about homelessness is it's very complicated as to how many inputs go into the system that creates the output of homelessness. So housing prices is a major concern. So the access to affordable housing in a city or a region can contribute significantly to whether someone finds themselves on the street or not. But as a whole, America doesn't have a great social net underneath society. So if someone is faltering in one area, there's not a lot of system to catch them when they fall. And so it's not just housing prices or finding access to affordable housing. It can become very complicated. It's where you're looking at significant mental health issues. We're looking at significant substance use disorder. We're looking at a lot of myriad of trauma that people face in society. And all of these different inputs can lead someone to this place of being unhoused in society. And when someone gets to that spot, that's where it can become very difficult to get out of that spot. And that's really where our organization, that's where we focus a lot of our effort, is really kind of three areas. There's relief of the immediate crisis response. Someone is on the street, maybe it's their first time on the street. Then we have shelter and we try to get them into a much safer immediate spot. Then there's the rehabilitation of saying, okay, there were many broken things that happened to lead you to this spot of where now you are unhoused. We need to begin to address some of those broken areas in your life that happened. And then from that point, after that begins to get addressed, then we can work in some development, or what are some skills that we can add? What are some capacity that we can build to really help along the way? And I think, going back to this question of cause, the biggest safety net that anyone can have in their life is relationship. If, God forbid, Danny, that something terrible happens in your life and you lose your job, or the place where you live is, demolished, or some terrible thing happens, the vast majority of us have a relational safety net that we can lean into or lean upon, whether it's a family, whether it's a friend that lets you sleep on their couch, or a parent that loans you some money. But when those relationships break down, then that's what ultimately leads a person to being on the street. And I think, especially in the United States, we have a stigma of wanting to blame drug addiction. And I think drug addiction is a problem, and substance use disorder is a problem. But, in the data that we find, both locally and when you look nationally, if you are to get information from people who are wrestling with substance use disorder, that are currently unhoused, of everyone who's in that spot, substance use disorder and unsheltered or unhoused, and you ask them, was addiction a part of your life before you were on the street? Only 20% of them say that this is why they're on the street. The other 80% who are using, they began using from the trauma of living on the street. So it's this really unfair thing where you've through trauma, through broken relationships, through whatever unfortunate circumstance finds you on the street, that's where a lot of people are now very vulnerable. And that's, again, a lot of complex systems. Fentanyl is a major concern in our community. And when someone's stuck in addiction, then it is difficult for them to recover some of the things they need to rebuild to get off the streets. So I think people want to say it's the only cause, and we would just say, no, it is important to have a plan for substance use, but it's not why the vast majority of people that we meet are on the streets, and that's not how they got there, and everyone has a story. So
thank you so much for bringing this up. I think this is actually a quite common misconception. Even in Brazil, I think this is something that it's been talked a lot. We don't really know the reality of people. We basically assume that they, are abusing. So it's really important, I think, that you bring this up. And that actually makes me more curious about how exactly do you work, because it's such a complicated context, that when you get to meet people, not just because of what's happening at that moment when you meet them, but what came before that and what their perspectives for the future are. And if I'm not wrong, I think I read on your website that you say that that your organization states that the idea is to create a permanent path, right, for the future, something that we can actually rely on. So how do you actually effectively make that happen?
Yeah, well, I think it's important for people to recognize that we can only give people some resources and empower them, but people have to make their own choices. And when we're looking at any person, we try to view them as an individual, and as a faith-based organization, we believe every person is made in God's image and carries dignity. And, one of the unfortunate realities of, let's go back to this conversation about drug use or addiction or substance use disorder. Oftentimes when we want to oversimplify the problem, and we do it in a way to blame others. Like, if that guy just wasn't using drugs, then he wouldn't be on the street. And that's never been correct. And so kind of trying to help educate people to think through this problem a little differently is a starting point in rebuilding anybody's life. That if we view someone as just a bad person and we want to disqualify them or say that everything is their fault, it doesn't really give them a path forward in their own life. And it doesn't help us as a society to recognize something that we just believe is true. Every person is worth dignity. And there are many people that they are trapped in very undignified lives. And how do we come alongside them as a society? Is it our job as fellow human beings to recognize that someone is worth being treated with dignity? So for us, we want to educate people that everyone is worth being shown dignity. Two, we encourage people to learn a story. And I think fentanyl is terrible, and it's a highly destructive drug that is destroying communities and lives. That is true. But when you learn the story of the young lady who became addicted to fentanyl, then instead of blaming her as a bad person, but you understand the massive trauma that she faced, and then she was in a vulnerable spot and made a poor decision in that moment, and now she's stuck. It's something that I very well could have been in that same scenario. Aside from God's grace, that wasn't my story. And to view people with some empathy and compassion requires us to understand, okay, they have a story in this. And we try to understand that story and rebuild from that story. So if someone has an addiction, recovery has to be part of that. We have to overcome that substance use disorder. But part of that is very holistic. There's the medical, chemical things that are happening in my body to break that. But then part of that is understanding, okay, you began using as a result of this trauma of when you were sexually assaulted by a family member, which caused you to run, and then you were on the street and you were vulnerable, and then you were used by another member in society. And so trying to track down with that person some of the base wounds and those broken relationships in their life and helping to rebuild those relationships gives us a path forward. So we offer case management. There's lots of different reasons why people come into shelter, and we want to find as a society these scalable solutions that kind of make a factory to help people. But when you're working with people, everyone has a story. Those stories are unique, and understanding the unique dynamics of that story to give them a path to permanency is really important.
That's actually a beautiful, beautiful approach, and one that we really need more often. I believe in that. Now, Myron, could you tell me more about some of the challenges that you face as an organization? Because I believe that you brought some day-to-day issues, as an approach, but we know that the realities for nonprofits can be harsh sometimes. So what is your structure, and what is the challenges that you face?
Yeah. In America, in the nonprofit realm, it's a unique spot we're in many ways fully reliant upon private funding. And at times we're able to utilize some government funding as well. But for most nonprofits in America, we are always resource starved. So we're trying to serve a growing population and a growing crisis. And the resources that we have to do that are always far less than what we wish they were. So, I think most people, when we talk about resources, they tend to think that we only mean money, and we do need money. Every organization needs, financial resource to operate. But I think there's so much that everybody can do to be involved at a volunteer level. We had 2,500 volunteers this last year. The average volunteer gave 4 hours of time. That's, 10,000 hours of manpower that are given. And that's so valuable. And sometimes we have a lot of people that say, well, how can I help? Well, all of us usually have some gently used clothing items that we can give away that we don't need as much as we think we do, or they've been sitting in my closet for far too long and I really don't need to hold on to it anymore. We encourage you to be generous with what you have. I encourage people to get involved at a heart level with getting their own life in proximity to other people. it changes the way we view things. So our needs are resources. We need resources. I think one of the other challenges we face is this is a complex issue that people want to oversimplify how we resolve it. But to really resolve homelessness, it's going to require our government working hand in hand with local community, with organizations like ourselves, other organizations, across a wide variety of disciplines, looking at mental health, looking at physical health, looking at structures and systems that all play together to lead to like one of the most unfortunate outputs of a society, which is unhoused peoples living on the street. And so really solving it requires a lot of collaboration. That's what we need. We need other people to get involved and interested and not pass the buck and say it's the government's job or it's our job. You know, people just say it's the Tacoma Rescue Mission's job to solve homelessness. We're all in big trouble. We can't do this alone. I think the only other thing I would add into that is, crisis moments require a crisis response. And there's some parts of our system that are designed to meet someone in crisis. But when something becomes a chronic problem, then a crisis response is no longer helpful. And so when someone has been chronically unsheltered or unhoused, when they've been living on the street for over a year, they've got significant either physical or mental disability, or they've got substance use disorder that prevents them from being able to rise up out of a shelter, then that's where we need to provide a more comprehensive chronic response to chronic issues. And that's where we believe in models like a community first model that provides housing and permanent support as well to really see someone able to flourish. And that's our goal. But yeah, we have a ton of needs in a very complex arena. So
yeah, well, it is a very complicated thing to just think about fixing it, right? It's really way far-fetched from that. Thank you for sharing. And just, to get the information right, for everyone that is listening and might be able to help you or might be in need of some help, what is the best way to approach you and to help?
Sure. Well, if there's people in Pierce County, then we encourage you to give us a call, and we will always provide shelter if this is someone's first time experiencing homelessness. We have some, it's our heart that no one who hits the street for the first time should be said that there's no space for them. So please reach out, and we'd love to walk alongside you in that journey. For people who want to be involved and aren't local in our area, then our website has lots of ways to get involved. I encourage people in your own context, get involved with a homeless shelter, volunteer, and put your life in proximity to other people and recognize that these are humans being that are worth being shown dignity and love, people made in God's image. If someone would like to give, I encourage you to donate to your local shelter, donate your food and clothing items. We're always accepting both. If you have financial capacity to give, you can give as well. We're available at trm.org/donate if that's something someone would like to do. But I encourage people to get involved in their own local communities to ensure that their own local communities have people who are educated and interested and available to give their lives to rebuild relationship.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing all of this and saying all of those things. It's really, really important that we all try to help in our own context, right? So I agree with you 100%. And thank you, Myron, so much for joining us. This was a great conversation, and thank you for the incredible work that you did.
Thank you very much for your time, Danny.
And for everybody listening, also, thank you for staying with us for one more episode. And remember, if you enjoyed it, press subscribe on YouTube or in your podcast app, because that shows the algorithms that this is an important conversation and more people can learn about the importance of the Tacoma Rescue Mission. Go to their website, donate if you can, or help out in any way you can. Bye, and I see you at the next episode.